Start the timer. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me. Huge thanks to Donna and Aaron for their presentations. I'm going to be chatting a little bit about improving cognitive assessment through the gamification of traditional psychological tasks and tests. So let's jump in. My name is Scott Oxholm, and I was a product manager at the Interactive Media Lab underneath the supervision of Professor Mark Chignall. So over the course of the summer, I wore a few different hats. I was helping out with some front-end design with a team of developers working in a new web framework called React. I was doing some back-end design and implementation in MySQL for a relational database. And finally, I was doing some user experience work in Figma with some high-fidelity prototypes. So at this stage in the game, some of you may be wondering, hey, Scott, I know you're a product manager, but what exactly were you managing? And that's what I'll be chatting about next. It seems as though my slides aren't working in presentation, so I'll continue over here. The product was called Brain Tagger. It's an application that measures and monitors cognitive functions through a suite of fun and engaging games. So that will be the focus of today. I'll be telling you a little bit about why this product exists in the first place, how it was built, and then where we are now. So the kind of work that I was doing and what I was doing it on. So jumping into it, the longer we live, the more we lose. It's a little bit of a scary title. So let me go a little bit deeper into it. You see on this diagram that I've included, we have cognitive functions on the y-axis and we have time on the x. So cognitive function is connected with age, and naturally as we age, it's normal for our cognitive function to decline, and you can see that in the green line that I've pointed an arrow towards. However, if you look at the yellow line that I've also included, representing Alzheimer's disease, which is a subset of dementia, we're seeing this rapid decline in cognitive function. And why is this concerning? Well, we've learned that if we lose our cognitive ability, we can also it can lead to a loss of our independence and the ability to complete activities of daily living. So how prevalent is this issue? Well, the World Health Organization globally estimates that the number of people with dementia will triple from 50 million in 2018 to 152 million by 2050. So this is a large issue, and that brings us to our gap, which is that as the population ages, there's an increasingly urgent need for efficient and effective methods of cognitive assessment that can be used on a large scale. So sharpen your pencils, folks, because I'm about to introduce you to a few industry standards. The first is the Montreal Cognitive Assessment, also known as MoCA. And the other is the Mini Mental State Examination, also known as the MMSE. So my resources have stated these as well-validated, reliable, and freely accessible, and for the MMSE, the most widely used assessment. Now, I'm here to argue that there is a better way than these paper and pencil tests, but first I need to introduce one more thing, and that is serious games. So this figure here is showing you the number of scholarly articles mentioning serious games for dementia on all online databases accessible through the University of Toronto Digital Holdings. So you can see in the 2010-2019 block, you're seeing a large jump in this conversation around serious games. So what are they? Really, it's a game with a primary purpose and something other than entertainment. So in this case, it would be a game with a primary purpose of cognitive assessment. So what are 4 reasons why serious games are more effective than paper and pencil tests? Well, the first is the more casual environment. Paper and pencil tests can cause anxiety and be stressful. I'm sure many of us have experienced this in our own university careers through exams, and this can impact the accuracy of assessments. The second is automation and reduced human error. Robots are better at collecting, storing, and retrieving data than humans. Thirdly, remote and rural access. So we can outsource these games, allow people to play it, look at the results, and proactively intervene where we start to see rapid decline or our attention is most needed. And finally, lower labor costs than pen and paper. And really what we're talking about here is when you have a pen and paper, pen and pencil test, you're looking at a 1-to-1 ratio between administrator and participant. When you have a serious game, you can have one person monitoring an entire lab. So now that we've talked about the why, what's our hypothesis? Well, we believe that it was possible to achieve the following: design a suite of games of cognitive assessment, measure cognitive ability accurately using those games, and utilize the benefits of gamification and digitization within those 2 previous points. So how do we validate whether or not we're measuring cognitive ability properly? So what if we use face validity? So does the test look like it's measuring the claim? Well, This isn't nearly tangible enough for a research paper. It's not even tangible enough for this presentation. So what are some other options? What about criterion validity? How well does one test measure predict the outcome for another measure? Well, this could still fail to substantiate our claim, because even if the measures predict one another, it doesn't mean that we're actually measuring cognitive ability properly. So what else? What about content validity? Is the content you choose to measure appropriate? This is fantastic at the beginning of a study, but doesn't help us later on to make sure that we're still oriented in the right direction. So there's one more validation option, and that is construct validity. So the formal definition is an empirical assessment that measures the underlying theoretical construct that the test is intending to measure, and that's generally through the use of factor analysis. In short, are you measuring the thing that you want to measure? Of course, this seems very intuitive, but it's probably the most difficult of all of the validation options. So where do we start? Let's start with what we know. We've learned that the MMSE and MoCA are valid cognitive assessments. So if brain tagger can be highly correlated to MMSE and MoCA, then it is also likely a valid measure. And the more information that we have supporting this correlation, the stronger our claim. So this is exactly what we found. We found a relationship between performance in our game and clinical measures such as MMSE and MoCA, in addition to a risk of having delirium. So briefly on the statistics, we completed linear regression, which is looking for a linear relationship between two factors. And we calculated an R statistic, which is the actual correlation, and found that it was high enough to indicate a relationship. So if I could quickly direct your attention over to the bottom left side of the screen, you see equation 1, which is for our false alarm rate. So we had to calculate that first, which is the number of errors that an individual is making. Then from that, we could find the combined performance metric, which is a combination of their response time and the number of errors that they make. From there, I want to direct your attention over to the table. There's a lot going on, but I want you to focus in on that right-hand column with numbers labeled combined metric. Those are the correlations between the mini mental state examination and our combined metric, and they were found to be high enough to indicate a relationship. So this is how we got to where we are. So where are we? So we have a suite of 8 games, as you can see in the top 2 images on the right. We have 3 different languages. In the middle 2 images on the left, you can see an English gameplay. On the right, you can see one of our login screens in Chinese, and we also offer in French. Now, this is put in place because we have researchers using Cognitive Incentivizer globally. So it's been super cool. I've got to email folks that are out of Shanghai, out of the US, out of different parts of Canada. And the final thing that I'd like to mention is that we recently received 120 of our custom button boxes, which is a really big differentiator for us with some of our competitors, because it helps with motor impairment. So folks that don't have the motor coordination for a mouse, but need the haptic feedback that isn't provided to them from a touch screen, it's a really great happy medium. So remember that hypothesis that I proposed before? How are we doing on that? Well, we've designed a suite of cognitive assessment games. We've measured cognitive ability accurately, and we've used gamification and digitization to do so. So what are some next steps? One of them is expansion. So we're looking at a workbench for custom parameterization to expand our audience of researchers that want to use the software. We're looking at future game development to include more cognitive functions to be assessed. And we're looking at built-in data organization and cross-study integration, allowing researchers to see all of their information across multiple studies with us. We're also looking at working with researchers to collect data, so improving our normative analysis of different age groups, strengthening that statistical correlation I mentioned before, and getting our software recognized and used in papers. So before I wrap up, there's one more thing that I'd like to chat about that's been on a lot of our minds, and that's COVID-19. So it's caused social isolation, unprecedented healthcare, and seniors at risk in a way that's never happened before. I've had the chance to speak with many healthcare professionals over the course of the summer, and they've brought my attention to some of the issues in long-term care facilities and hospitals, and to think that the software I'm working on currently could help people assess their cognitive abilities earlier on to prevent them needing to get put into these difficult situations, or even the thought that we could use this to give individuals something meaningful, something engaging to work with while they're not able to see friends and family was really meaningful for me. So I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank everybody at the Interactive Media Lab for allowing me to be a part of that family. I hope you learned something about your brain, something about cognitive assessment, and a little bit about brain tagger. So thank you again, and here's some of my resources. I welcome any and all questions. So thank you so much. Great.
Hello, Scott.
Hi, Sherry.
I raised my hand, but I guess I just unmuted and I started talking.
Sounds good.
Thank you for such an engaging presentation.
Thanks.
I have two questions. Hopefully you can get through them quickly if someone else has a question.
Yeah.
My first one is with respect to older adults and their familiarity with computing. Was that a challenge for you with respect to video games? And my second question was, I'm a big board game player.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering if any consideration was made as to how board games, real touch and feel board games, might fit into this equation with cognitive testing.
Right. Yeah, those are fantastic questions. Thank you so much, Sherry Ann. So to address your first one with older adults and video games, for sure it was a concern. So we want to make sure that this was something that older folks could understand and younger folks could understand. So especially if they're going to be working through this on their own, one of the things that I was working on this summer was coming up with a better design to help them understand the games. So what we have is we have instructions that precede each of our games. And then we also have a tried out version, which was a new feature that was implemented recently that allows them to play through a shortened version of the game and get helpful prompts along the way to learn about how the games work. In terms of the button box that we've designed, that's how it'll work best. And we allow for the buttons to light up to help older individuals indicate where they're supposed to press. And the buttons, in turn, are a really big factor in terms of helping older individuals because it's much easier to press a button. It requires a lot less motor capability, which is one of the big issues when you're getting into sort of that older audience. In terms of your second game, I too am a board game lover. So it's interesting that you brought that up. I think the benefit here when you're looking at a game, particularly digital, is that you're getting away from the need to have, too many physical objects. It allows for a lot of individuals to be working through, a station that can be easily sanitized, that's very highly accessible, can be used on devices that they already have. So it's trying to reduce as much hardware as possible for these people to need to purchase. So I think that was some of the goals there, but who knows, going forward, we may look into getting more physical interaction. Some of our other projects in the lab include that. So hopefully that answered your question, Sherry Ann.
It did answer it somewhat. Thank you. I will not give you any more questions right now because I think other people might be waiting.
Yeah, for sure. If you have any more, feel free to send me a note. I'd be happy to chat some more afterwards. Simon, you have your hand up?
Hey, I don't know if it's fixed and now you can hear me.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, perfect. Nice presentation. I have just a question about, I never heard about this serious game. And it's cool to see that there is a strong correlation between your result on your game and the actual gold standard in paper. But that's for one pathology. Do you think that for some type of pathology, your game can actually be better than the paper, or do you think that it will still be the standard?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think that's the goal, right? And so what we're doing right now is trying to work with enough researchers to get this game established as a standard in the field. So a lot of times what was happening with these cognitive assessments is that they were established and they were used in so many different papers that it became the standard, right? So as of right now, the goal is to correlate it with what's currently out there. But going forward, the idea will definitely be to establish our own norms, to be able to say that, okay, above and beyond what's already out there, look at all of the data that we've put together, look at what we've been able to accomplish with it. I think that's definitely a goal for us. So that was, again, some of the work that I was doing. I was working directly with researchers and saying, okay, we'll let you use the software if you can give us access to some of your data so we can improve, our norms for different age groups, establish those, set them up. And then, we have access to all that data for our own papers, our own studies to establish the Brain Tagger brand as, an industry standard.
Okay, thank you for your answer.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for asking.
Are there any more questions?
Sherry Ann, did you have a follow-up? I can maybe squeeze it in.
I think it's 4 o'clock now, so I think it's a hard stop at 4.
Sounds good. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you again. I really appreciate you all listening.
Thank you for your presentation, Scott.